Okay, seems like our people joining us slowed down a bit. So again, welcome everybody to our risk management workshop for the TAMP. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm the Caltrans State Asset Management Engineer. And today I will be presenting along with Don Foster. We need this workshop to be very interactive with all of you, and the timing associated with the things that we need to get done in the uncertainty of the interaction time made it a little tricky. So we've kind of broken it up into a couple different days. So we're going to do day one today, and we're going to push forward as much as we can today, and then we will, depending on how far we get, we'll either continue on going through the specifics of some of the risks in day two, or if we end up making it through all the risks today, then we'll focus on our breakouts and getting into more, how are we going to mitigate these risks that we have. So I will say, we did a risk workshop for the initial TAMP. That was about 4 years ago from right now. And we had maybe 50, 60 people that were able to participate. It was a physical workshop, meaning we were all in person, sitting around tables, and there was some limitation of the size of the room. And so we're happy that, doing this virtually, at least one of the benefits is we can have a much, broader attendance. And so we're hoping that broader attendance is going to give us, a broader perspective on risks, and particularly, the risks that the cities and counties are facing, the MPOs, the RTPAs. I mean, we're pretty familiar with what the risks that Caltrans faces are, but, sometimes we have different things that we're concerned about when it comes to risk between Caltrans and, our city county partners and regional and MPO partners. So anyway, we just ask that you be patient and bear with us on the timing. We're committed to get the engagement, and if we have to do a day 3 for this workshop, we're prepared to do that. But we're going to give it our best, kind of going through the particulars here. We're going to start off with a little bit. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, this slide cracks me up. If you're in this workshop and you don't have any sound, then you wouldn't be hearing my voice, but hopefully you can read the screen. Make sure that when you're clicking, you click the join now. And then just a reminder to everybody that if you want to chat, and we encourage the chatting, please make sure you're chatting to everyone. Okay, there's an all attendees, but all attendees doesn't send the chat to anybody that's organizing this conference. So please make sure you're chatting to everyone, then we can all see your chat. If you want to get the attention of our team here, you can use the raise hand feature, and that will let us know that you need something or that you have a comment that you want to make on a particular area. And then if for some reason you have any technical issues throughout the workshop, please feel free to email. And I know it sounds funny to email, but if you email cttam@dot.ca.gov, we are monitoring that email box, and we'll, if you provide your contact information, we'll get someone that can provide you some assistance. Next slide. I went through a quick overview. I'm going to walk through sort of the basics of risk management as it pertains to transportation asset management plan development. Then we're going to walk through all of the risks that were identified in our initial TAMP, provide an opportunity for all of you to identify new risks that weren't on our radar 4 years ago when we did this. So be thinking about those kinds of things that you see as risks in your agency. And then we'll be going through an assessment of those risks. And then depending on time, we may get into what we call the 5 T's, and this is basically how the strategies for addressing the risk, and then closing remarks. If for some reason the risk identification and assessment goes long, then we're going to just push everything into day 2, the remainder of the agenda into day 2. And then today we also will have an informal time similar to our last workshops. If there's any questions about what we cover in this workshop and you want to have a more intimate setting, usually in those informal Q&A sessions, it drops down to, just a couple handfuls of people. So that option will be there for you again today. Next slide. Can you animate, please? There we go. So we've been following this roadmap of workshops, and with the completion of this workshop, we'll be halfway done through the overall process. In July, our next workshop will be bringing a consultant in to help us and going through the investment strategies. What is investment strategies from the standpoint of the TAMP. And then you could see the remaining workshops we have. But after this one's done, we'll be 50% through the sort of data collection portion of the TAMP development. Next slide. We started our series back in April. We're going to work through this, collecting information, and then, take all of that information and develop a draft TAMP that will then go out to all of you for review and comment. Our schedule is to take the draft TAMP to the commission in January, with hopeful that we can get an adoption of it in March, maybe if we can. We do have to submit the TAMP, and I know it says May, but that date's been subject to a little bit of discussion that we've been having, and it looks like we're going to have our TAMP done by March of 2022. So that it really accelerates our time frame a little bit. But we're just kind of in the throes of it right now, I guess, is the main point. Next slide. We will be using polling today quite extensively, and we're going to ask you to sign into the polling, and you would do this by texting to 22333. So that's the number you're going to text to, and in the text message body, type in Caltrans 300, and it's not case sensitive. Once you do that, you will get a text reply, and the reply has a link. Do not click on the link. Okay, repeat. Once you text to 22333, and in the body type in Caltrans 300, you'll get a message back. Don't click on that link. That'll take you to the wrong place. It's a poll everywhere link. Don't click it. Okay, once you get that message back, you're ready to respond to our polls. And so we're trying to use a split screen today so we can show the screen and show the polls. This is going to be really important when we get into actually assessing the risks. We want to be able to have the risks shown on the left side and then have the poll results shown on the right side. So give everyone just one more time on your cell phone, create a text message. The 2 number is 22333. So 2 2s and 3 3s. Type in Caltrans 300 in the body, hit send, you'll get a response. And then that'll get you ready for polling. So we're going to go right into our first poll to see how we're doing right now. So if you've got logged into the poll and you represent an MPO, please text in A, the letter A. If you're an RTPA, please text in B. If you're a city, use the letter C. If you're a county, text in the letter D. If you're Caltrans, text in E, and if you're another agency, please text in the letter F.
So hopefully everybody can see the responses on the screen. We will have this dual looking poll everywhere software glitch, but the responses are shown there. So hopefully you can all recognize those. It looks like we should be waiting for a few more responses. I know there are a number of people in this workshop today, and we really need a majority of participation.
Yeah, I think we'll give everybody a few minutes. I mean, we've got 113 people in this workshop today, and I'm only seeing results for about 40 or 50.
Yes.
So again, if you're having any trouble on your cell phone, create a text message. The number you're going to be texting to is 22333, and in the body of the text, type in Caltrans 300, and you should get a text response back. You do not go into, do not click on that link in the text back. Okay, so we're still probably about half of the people in the workshop have got the text, the polling working at this point. It looks like we've got 6 MPOs, 7 now. Small number of RTPAs, about 9 cities, 10 cities, 2 counties, about 38, 39 Caltrans, and a couple of others. Okay, let's go to the next poll, Dawn.
Okay.
And for some reason, I'm seeing the poll like on top of the slide.
Yes, Mike, that is what I was alluding to. We have a glitch in the software right now, and we were not able to clear that bottom screen. So I do apologize that the responses are hopefully visible to everybody in the polls. So let's go ahead. We went through and cleared responses. We're going to take a poll on this next question. I'm sorry, that was my fault here. So go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so the next poll, again, is trying to understand where everybody, is coming from in terms of their primary work area. Are they planning? Text A, if your budgets or finance; B, engineering design; C, public works maintenance and operations; D, admin; E, or other, use F. Okay, and again, if anybody's having trouble with the poll, please, you can put something in chat. We've got people monitoring chat, and maybe they can help you. Yeah, okay. We don't want to end up in Texas Capitol session. So anyway, looks like we've got a good mix of different disciplines in the workshop today. So I think that'll really bode well for us going into the risk discussion. Can we go back to a single slide now? Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to go through a quick overview of risk management for the purposes of TAMP. Many of you probably have talked or heard of risk management in various contexts. With respect to transportation asset management, there is a formal definition. It's the process and framework for managing potential risks, including identifying, analyzing, evaluating, and addressing the risks to assets and system performance. And I want to just focus on the asset and system performance for a minute, because when we get into this risk, you'll see things like, well, geez, if we have a lot of people retiring and we're worried about the continuity of staff. And that's not an asset or system performance risk. That's what we call an enterprise risk. So that will be something that, we can identify, we could capture, but it's really, at the end of the day, won't have any real bearing on what we're doing in asset management. Next slide. So as we go through these risks, we're going to get to a point here in the workshop where we're going to be bringing up one risk at a time. We're going to be asking you to use the polling software to assess the likelihood and consequence. So if you're kind of sitting on the fence thinking, do I really want to do it? I highly encourage you to get the polling software going on your computer. There are some notes in the chat saying, we've got people trying to help out. So please just bear with us and we'll get you going in that regard. But as we go through these risks, we're going to ask each of you to assess likelihood of a risk occurring in time and the consequence. And then at some point, we're going to get into classifying the type and nature of these risks. So we're going to categorize them into different categories. Next slide. So why have risk in the TAMP? Well, stuff happens out there, right? We have bridges crack and break. We've got floods. We've got, sea level rise. We've got, earthquakes. We've got all kinds of things. And these things, when they occur, they have impact on our transportation budget because we've got to go out and fix them. And the reason they come into the asset management plan is because we want to, and we will be talking about concepts of life cycle planning. And one question is, is it advantageous for us to try to mitigate the risk in advance of actually realizing the risk, or not? And for example, if we were to retrofit bridges for earthquakes, then we have an earthquake, we don't sustain any damage. If we don't retrofit bridges for earthquakes and we have an earthquake, then we have bridges fall down and we have to pay to rebuild them, and we lose their use while they're being rebuilt, in addition to the potential for injuries or fatalities when people are on the bridge during an earthquake. So for all of these reasons, risks really, our treatment of risk within asset management influences how much money we have to do other things. If we say we're going to put so much money towards risk mitigation, then we don't have that available for condition improvement, for example. So bringing these in just makes our plan more realistic. It's really the bottom line. Next slide. So what's required? We need to identify the risks, okay, and specifically the risks that can affect the condition of national highway system pavements and bridges and the performance of the national highway system overall. Okay, so we're not talking about things that really don't affect the national highway system. We need to assess the risks in terms of likelihood and consequence. We need to do an evaluation and prioritization of the identified risks. In other words, which of these risks are high priority versus low priority risks. And we'll walk everybody through doing that. And once we identify and assess and prioritize those risks, then we will be moving into breakout groups to talk about mitigation plans for addressing the risks and how we're going to monitor the mitigation work that we have proposed. And then the one other thing that is required under federal regulation is a summary of infrastructure facilities, pavements, bridges, and others that have been repeatedly damaged by emergency events. And that is a specific listing of locations, highway segments, roadway segments, bridges that have had multiple damage caused by an emergency event. And we'll get into more specifics about that later. Next slide. So if you look at 23 CFR 515.7, that's where all of the requirements for risk management in a TAMP come from. We're looking at risks associated with current and future environmental conditions. It may be extreme weather or climate change, could be seismic, could be flood, risk related to recurring damage. So if we see that the same bridge or the same highway segment or roadway segment keeps getting damaged, it may be a better life cycle decision for us to mitigate that risk than to keep paying to repair it over and over again if it gets damaged. We are to consider financial risks as a budget uncertainty, right? So, and we'll get into each one of these categories in a little bit more detail. Operational risks such as asset failure. There was a collapse of a pedestrian bridge in Washington, D.C. today, and it shut down a freeway in Washington, D.C. So what are those risks that, you have that kind of failure? And then if there's any strategic risks, that might come into play, and they list environmental compliance, but there could be others that we have to think about. Like we're in the process of implementing, 743 and moving from level of service to VMT, and that could be potentially a strategic risk. Next slide. So at the end of the day, the risk assessments that we do, we're going to just kind of, put some blinders on to other things today, and we're going to just focus on risk. But the reason we're doing it is to understand the degree at which these risks are going to impact the financial plans and our investment strategies. So we covered the financial plans in our last workshop. Investment strategies are our next workshop. After we do the risks, we'll have all the building blocks. We'll have inventory, we'll have condition, we'll have available funding, and we'll have risks. And that's what we need to take into the investment strategy workshop. Next slide. As far as the risk mitigation strategies, we have a couple of options. We could choose to treat a risk or mitigate it. So seismic retrofit would be an example of mitigating an earthquake vulnerability. We could tolerate the risk, so we could say, well, okay, we're going to just let it ride and hope we don't have an earthquake, but we're not going to do anything different to our bridges. Terminating or avoiding a risk is tricky if it doesn't lend itself so well to infrastructure. But there may be a case that, particularly in the strategic area or a financial area, there may be a way that we could avoid a risk completely. We can opt to transfer a risk. In the case of infrastructure, that might be through relinquishments, where we're going to relinquish parts of the highway system or bridges to someone else that then assumes the risks associated with those assets. And risks are not always negative. So in some cases, risk can be a very positive thing. And in that case, we want to take advantage of that opportunity. So one positive risk that comes to mind is, all of the federal infrastructure discussion that's going on right now. That could have a positive impact on all of our financial situation. And so we want to be able to recognize that within the TAMP. Next slide. Okay, and then I mentioned what's called this 667 provision. It's 23 CFR 667, which is why they call it the 667 provision. But this is the repeatedly damaged infrastructure due to emergency events. So the qualifier here is that it has to be a presidential or gubernatorial declared emergency. And it has to be on just the NHS. So, this analysis should be part of our risk management process because it's really a life cycle consideration. Do we want to mitigate these areas or continue to pay when they get damaged? We are required by federal regulation to use all reasonable efforts to obtain data to identify repeatedly damaged facilities. And so we've done a preliminary assessment, which we'll present a little bit later. And we've gone through evaluation of all of the federal emergency relief dollars from 2006 to 2020 for both the state and local system. And we're looking for coincidence of location, meaning the same bridge, the same highway segment. And so we'll be presenting that information to all of you in all of the cities and counties, MPOs, RTPAs, for the local side to see if you're in concurrence that these are in fact repeatedly damaged infrastructure, or potentially to identify others that we may have missed. Next slide. So there's some challenges here. Some of the things are tricky because they don't immediately happen, like sea level rise, for example. So, we know the seas are rising. There's models to predict them, but it happens very slowly. And sometimes if it's far off in the future, we might tend to say, oh, well, we'll get that next go around. And, that could be tricky. A lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of risk, we don't have any control over. I mean, we can't control an earthquake. It's hard for us to control a flood or a fire or sea level rise, right? So these things are out of our control. Looking at, what the impact is of some of these risks, the size of the population exposed to the risk, things like that come into play are tricky sometimes. And then, I don't know this common dread, but, there's kind of this emotional response to risk that, generally speaking, public agencies are very risk averse, and it's like we don't want to even talk about it, right, sometimes. So, we've got to overcome all of that in our workshop today and in subsequent days. And then, overconfidence, availability of data to quantify your risk. These are all challenges. And, a lot of us, being in transportation, kind of more of a scientific type of profession, we want to have, this desire for certainty, but with risk, everything's probabilistic. And this makes it a little more tricky sometimes. Next slide. I talked a little bit about enterprise risks. So these are generally the risks that occur within an agency. So Caltrans would have our own enterprise risks, but every city, county, MPO, RTPA, you also have your own enterprise risks. Generally speaking, the responsibility for those risks are going to be your senior executives, your policymakers, but generally enterprise risks will not find their way into the TAMP. Program risks definitely going to find their way into the TAMP, right? Because we're talking about funding programs that are going to be impacted by potential risk mitigation. So program level, absolutely. We're not talking about project risk either. So when you get down to one location and you're looking at, well, what are the risks of my delivery here? Can I get this permit? What if I don't get this in time? So they tend to be a lot of schedule costs driven kind of considerations that are at a project level, generally not considered in a TAMP. Activity level, more risks that are specific among functions that support a program or project, not so much for the TAMP. So, of these four types of risks, or four levels of risk, most of our work is going to be at the program level as we go through these various risk statements. Next slide. Just to kind of break the risks up a bit, we've categorized them into these 7 categories. And it doesn't mean we couldn't add a category if we needed to, if that was a consensus. But this is, looking at the risks that were previously identified, they generally fit in these 7 buckets. So we have those related to asset performance, risks related to highway safety. Then we have external threats. So that's all the weather, climate change, all of that. Finances, information and decision-making risks, business operation risks, and project and program management type of risks. And we're going to go through the specific risks under each one of these categories here in a few minutes. Next slide. So our risk category 1 is asset performance. So we're looking at really asset failure. So this could be bridge failure, full or partial, pavement failure. We might be looking at capacity or utilization issues, reliability or performance. If we have things that are obsolete, we might want to consider that. And possibly maintenance and operation. I mean, if we have something that we can't maintain, that's not going to bode real well for its long-term reliability. There are some elements that go along with this, regular inspection programs, documented funding for repair and maintenance. I mean, these are sort of basic, asset ownership type things. We should be, building our assets and then maintaining them to extend that ultimate replacement of them, not just building them and let them, deteriorate to the point they need to be replaced again. That wouldn't be a very good asset management approach. So we look at intervention levels. So when do we need to do certain things? So that's kind of that, this is like pavement and bridges. Anything physical will follow this asset performance type of risk category. Next slide. Highway safety, kind of self-explanatory, but we're looking at crash rates and crash factors, countermeasures, things that we're doing to improve performance, trends in fatalities, serious injury, property damage. We can use all of that to kind of quantify that risk. And, safety, generally there's a lot of money that's spent on transportation safety. And so it definitely has an impact on, the funding that you have available to take care of other infrastructure. There might be, processes in place, like I know Caltrans has processes in place to capture where crashes occur and the nature and, the conditions leading to those crashes and so forth. And we've got programs to go out and mitigate for those crashes as well. Next slide. External threats, I talked a lot about that. Climate change, extreme weather, seismic, terrorism falls into that category. Accidents, we have vehicles that hit our infrastructure, whether it's bridges or light poles or guardrail. And we have vessels that also hit bridges and other transportation infrastructure. So we need to think about those. And then, this paradigm shifting technology, we think of like autonomous vehicles, what is that going to do to us? And, so I think everybody's pretty clear on the kinds of things we would look at, what is the potential threat? What would the impact be? How much would it cost to mitigate? That sort of thing. How does that compare to, to replacement within a life cycle program and so forth. Next slide. Finance is all about money. So, we either get new money or we lose money. Stability of funding. These are all potential risks to a transportation asset management plan. If you can't count on your budget, it's kind of hard to make a long-term plan. So we in our prior workshop, we looked at, recent expenditures. We, send information out to all the, all of the MPOs and some RTPAs asking for projections of future funding availability. And for those of you that have gotten that back to us, we really appreciate that. But that's the kind of information that helps us understand how big these risks will be. Next slide. Information and decisions. So, this comes up sometimes in combination with other risks like external threats. So, we don't really know exactly what, what the sea level rise is going to look like. We don't really know exactly where the next fire is going to break out. So this absence of data or information can make decision making kind of tricky sometimes. And so, we want to consider that, in conjunction with other things or sometimes by itself. We're not exactly sure what autonomous vehicles are going to look like, what the demand on transportation system will be. Next slide. For business operations, so these are things that, again, like employee safety and health. I mean, we can't very well maintain things if we can't keep our maintenance workers safe and healthy, or construction workers. If we don't have good control or understanding of our inventory, purchasing, contracting, I think in this category, you got to think, does this rise to the level that it's going to affect the entire state of California's asset management plan? So again, I don't know that, unless just across the board, we're saying employee safety and health is this big deal and we're going to be spending a ton of money on it. It may or may not rise to that level, and that'll all shake out when we start prioritizing. Next slide. And then the last, I think this is our last risk category, has to do with project and program management. So these are like really, particularly project management is super mature in the United States and in most of our agencies. But if we see risks here or policy changes or procedures, it would have to be pretty big, again, to rise to the level that it's going to affect the asset management plan for the whole state of California. Next slide. Okay, so then when we go to assess the NHS risks, there's sort of well-defined approaches for quantifying and assessing risk, but these formal approaches tend to be really time-intensive and data-hungry. And in reality, even though there's formal approaches, there are some assumptions that have to be made. And I think when you think about a TAMP that covers the whole state of California, those assumptions that may be appropriate for Caltrans may not be appropriate for cities and counties. And so, we're going to have to probe that a little bit. And that's why it's so important that we get everybody polling. But generally the state of the practice is, to establish a formal program for addressing common risks. So those things that we collectively say are high priority in all of our agencies, those are the ones we really want to make sure that we get into the asset management plan. Then you develop a risk register. This is not like just listing a risk without some mitigation. In the TAMP, if we identify a risk, then we have to develop strategies to mitigate it, and we have to develop monitoring mechanisms to monitor that risk, and our degree at which we're mitigating it over time, and that can be challenging sometimes. A lot of the risks, are going to be expert judgment. Well, what do you think is going to happen with respect to sea level rise? Well, there's what the experts say, but honestly, different agencies have different opinions on, what that rise is going to be. There's different models. They have different levels of predictions. So these are tricky sometimes. And then, like I said, for these high priority ones, we will be developing, we're required to put in the TAMP mitigation strategies and monitoring strategies. Next slide. Okay, so that was a very quick overview of, the work that we have to do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, and she's going to start walking through some of these, and we'll see how this goes. So good luck, Dawn.
Thanks, Mike. That was really a great presentation. I always learn something more from you as you detail out a lot of this information. So I appreciate that as well. This is just a very quick overview of the process and documentation. And if Mike has some time, I'd like to bring him back before we go into the polling. And we'll see whether or not we can get through this quickly and get right to the meat of this particular workshop, which is all about identifying and assessing our risk. So before we get there, I just had a few items I wanted to cover with you. And let's see if we can get that going here. So, this risk management process is a well-defined process. This is what the International Standards Organization has come up with, which is, an organization of experts in risk management. It's very simple. It's very similar to other processes that we do within asset management, within transportation, and so forth. So with risk management, we're going to talk a lot about identification of risk, making sure we have updated our TAMP to the most current risks that we have, and then we're going to come up with these top priority risks. So we want to spend a lot of time in this area today, and we're going to poll each and every one of the risks that are identified today. If we have to spill over to another workshop to get this done, we've identified, talk about risk, we've identified that as a possibility. But we really, as Mike has already mentioned, we would really like you to make sure that you are participating fully in this process. And once you start, please continue through the entire session, because we want to make this as consistent as possible. As far as our results go. Then we're going to, as I said, we'll do this assessment, which is also an analysis of, like, we utilize a risk matrix, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And we do that through a likelihood and consequence for each and every one of these risks. And as Mike has already mentioned, the last part of this process is going to be the mitigation and monitoring component. So with that, I want to talk about documentation. How do we document these risks? What does it look like? Mike mentioned it earlier. We use this risk register, and it documents and lists out every one of these risks that we'll be identifying. We do that in terms of what's called risk statements. The likelihood and the consequence information is included in the risk register, as well as the potential mitigation actions. We will include, for an overview of risk registers, Mike has already talked about the fact that there's positive and negative risks, and we want to focus primarily on those threats and the negative risks, because those are what trigger mitigation needs. What does a risk register look like? It's a simple spreadsheet or matrix that summarizes an organization's risks, how they are analyzed, and records how they will be managed. So they can be customized. For the California TAMP Risk Register, it's a simple format, and I'll show you that now. Before we do, though, I want to, this is a really important slide as we move forward to do our risk assessment. Risk is formed in the as a risk statement, and it's a risk statement that is typically an if-then statement, is how I remember it from back in the day, learning about if-then statements in school. So in this case, if X, then Y. X should be a specific event, and Y is the impact that would result in California not meeting the objectives of the TAMP. So here's an example that you can look to. So if allowable truck weights increase, then we may need to divert funds to strengthen our bridges. So X is equal to the allowable truck weights increase, and Y is we may need to divert funds to strengthen bridges. So I want to bring this up, and you'll hear this a number of times as we move through. And when we ask you for additional risks that we need to consider today, we do need you to provide that in the form of a risk statement. So here's the example risk register. In the blue, we're indicating all of the risks through these risk statements. As Mike spent a lot of time on, we're going to categorize those risks. Then we're going to analyze them and document that in the green section of our risk register. And in the light pink is our mitigation area, our response and monitoring of our risks. So as you can see, it's really very simple, and we'll be doing this and document it as part of our TAMP process. So starting from the beginning, so what are we doing for the update for the 2022 TAMP? And what I want to start to this is by indicating that we sent out, prior to the workshop, all of the initial TAMP risks. There were 15 of them. And we asked our local partners to review those and give us some feedback on whether or not they are considered still relevant today for their agency. We felt that was important. It would give us enough information to kind of put this presentation together for you. And the feedback was really helpful in that it really told us that the risks that are in the TAMP, the initial TAMP right now, are still relevant to most agencies. So we're going to be going through all 15 in this workshop. The risks will be presented by the 7 risk categories, so you'll see that as well. And then after we go through the assessment or reassessment of these initial 15 risks, we will then go and start to capture any additional risks and new risks that need to be assessed. And that's pretty much what we're going to do. So with that, we're going to go ahead and, Mike, do you have a moment to do the overview and kind of set the stage for us before we go into polling? Otherwise,
Sure.
Okay, perfect. To do that.
Okay, so Dawn showed you the risk ISO wheel here. I call it the risk management process. So we're talking about assessment here, which is, so we're taking the prior risks as our identification, and we can revisit the identification if it's necessary, but we're really focusing on assessing those previously identified risks in light of the current situation that we're in today. Next slide. So generally, we'll be looking at trying to assess the likelihood of occurrence. So this is done using a time scale, so that's the vertical scale. And then we'll be assessing consequence, and we're using 2 different scales. One is a cost, and the other is loss of system. So loss of use of the roadway system. And depending on our responses there, we'll fall into one of these multicolored boxes. And what we're really going to be focusing on is those risks that fall into the boxes that are red. Either they're high likelihood or a combination of high likelihood and high consequence, or maybe lesser likelihood but high consequence. So that's really how we're going to walk through this. And every single risk, based on our responses, we'll know sort of where it fits overall in this matrix. Next slide. So we've established the likelihood as this is the likelihood of a risk occurring within that time frame. So would the risks that we're considering occur within a year or less, between 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 25, or greater than 25 years. So when you think about something like an earthquake, a big earthquake, I mean, we haven't had a big earthquake in 25 years, or it's been more than 25 years. And so it's not a very likely event, but it can have very high consequences, right? So, and then other things may occur very frequently, but the consequences aren't as great. So time scale for likelihood, and again, the question you want to ask is, how likely is this risk to be realized in this time frame? Next slide. And then for consequence, some of the things are going to be cost-based and others are going to be system-based. So for the cost-based items, if there's no cost, then it's going to be low. If it's, very high cost, then, you'll be on the other end of that spectrum. And likewise, if the risk has no impact to the system, it's going to have a low consequence. If, it could cause the loss of a critical route, then it would be on the high end of the consequence scale. And we'll put these scales up for you when you go to vote, so don't feel like you have to try to memorize this. Next slide. All right, Don, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I knew you would set it up here so that we can go straight into the polling, so I appreciate that. So at this time, we really need your assistance to pull out your phones, and we're going to be doing a number of polls that you will hopefully already have activated by going to 22333 and texting Caltrans 300. And so we did those early polls so that you hopefully are already in the Poll Everywhere on your cell phone, and then we can just get started here. So with that, I want to call your attention to our very first risk. Oh, actually, before I get there, I almost forgot. I put this slide in as we think about risks and formulating risk statements and thinking about how we're going to score these particular risks. I came up with this idea that we need to really think about each of these risks in the following way. And I'm using the RISK to do that. So for R, I'm asking, is this risk still relevant to your agency today? We've mentioned this a number of times. 4 years ago, a risk could have been really a high risk for you. But 4 years later, things can change. It may have dropped to a medium or low, and vice versa. So that's an important thing we want you to think about as we move into the polling. The next is I, influence. As Mike mentioned a number of times as well, do you think the TAMP should be influenced by this risk? Would it impact the financial plan and investment strategies? That's an important thing when we're thinking about these risks and the TAMP. S, statement. Do you think the risk statement is accurately represented? So I wasn't involved in the risk management workshop for the initial TAMP, and I had to take a lot of these risks at face value, do some research on my own. But in some cases, I think they're very generally stated. And so we want you to think about that when we start going through these risk statements. And there is going to be opportunity to detail these further, to think about them in terms of maybe there is a different, or this could be stated a different way, or it's a different risk altogether. And you will have the opportunity to include that as part of our session on new risks that are going to be identified. And K is just keep in mind, again, that we need you to provide these risk statements in the form of an if-then statement. Okay, so here we go. I hope we're all ready and have our cell phones out, and we're going to go to risk 1. Risk 1 does not mean it's the highest priority initial TAMP risk. It's just that we needed a way to ensure that we were capturing results correctly. And in addition, we're going to show you these initial TAMPs by category. So for the first 4 risks, I believe, they're all considered asset performance risks. And this first risk is saying, if we make projects more complex by the addition of multiple assets and involve complete streets, project delivery may be delayed. Now, before we poll, one of the other things I wanted to mention today is that we did receive feedback from a number of agencies when we did go out and ask them whether or not they thought these risks were still relevant. And we got some really good feedback and comments on them. And I thought it would be good to open up, at this time to talk about these specific comments that came in, and then provide you the opportunity to also weigh in and comment on this risk so that before we poll, there's enough information that somebody can actually, take a poll on. And my concern is that if we just throw this out there, we may not have stimulated enough conversation or understood where we're going with this to be able to poll. So if you do have comments about this particular risk or any other risk, please include that in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and talk about it. But before we do, some of the initial comments that came in on risk 1 was from an MPO, And it seemed like from the comment that they didn't think this was really a high risk for them because they do encourage complete streets and they do see this as a necessity. I also got a comment that came in from a county agency that also identified this as more of a minor risk. And then a city agency came back and told us that, well, actually, this could really significantly increase costs through scope creep. So those were some of the initial comments. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add before we go ahead and do a likelihood and consequence on this particular risk? Go ahead and include it in the chat, and then we'll move forward to the poll. Okay, I'm not seeing okay, we do have something that came in. It basically is saying this could increase project delivery time as well and increased cost. So thank you for that. Anything else? It will depend on the maturity of local plans. And then a follow-up on one of those other comments is, well, it will increase cost if it was not included in the original scope. Okay, let's go ahead and poll at this time. I think that that was all really good feedback for today, and I'm going to try to make this work for you. So here we go. I'm hoping, I'm going to have to activate this again. So bear with me, and let me take this out of PowerPoint mode and re-log in. Hopefully I only have to do this one more time. Shows that I'm in here. So let me go back to slideshow. And I'm going to run through a couple of these to see if it activates. And it does. Okay. So here we go. So for this risk, determine the likelihood that this risk will occur. It looks like we've got a couple of votes already in. Again, please text the letter A, B, C, D, E, or F for this particular risk and the likelihood that the risk will occur within these time frames. And again, we need the majority of you voting and polling on these so that we feel comfortable we're getting the results that are valid for us. It's looking pretty good, so I'll let it go for a little bit longer. So we have about let's see, I'm not showing the total, usually the total responses. Okay, there we go, 47. I'd like to see a few more. I hope, let's see if we can get additional, more than 47, because we want to be consistent moving forward if we can. Okay, we're still at 47. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll at this time. Let's see, what did we have? Let me go back to the show response. Okay, we're at 49 total responses. Okay, so let's go ahead and close the poll. And I want to ensure that we have recorded the responses. And I do have someone helping me with that. So can you just let me know that this has been recorded? Yue, are you there? Okay, you might be muted. So I'm hoping that we got this recorded by Yue, and we're going to go ahead and clear the response at this time and move to risk 2. So thank you. Oh, actually, no, I take that back, guys. We're going to go to the consequence first. So for this particular risk, we want you to poll on the consequence of this risk to the system, either cost or impact. And you have 5 choices there, so please go ahead at this time and record your response of A, B, C, D, or E by texting it at this time. Okay, great. It's going. This is good news for me that it's working. And we want to get up there to the 40, I believe it was 49 or close to it. So let's see where we're at. So I'd like to get a few more. We've got 47, 48. I need one more if possible. And we've got 48 results. Give it another second here, but I think we're going to end up with this as our final number. Up 49, we got it. All right. So let's go ahead and close the poll at this time. I just want to make sure that we have recorded the poll. So hopefully that is happening as we speak. And now we'll go on to the next risk. So bear with me as I work my way through this. So we'll go ahead and clear the response on this one and go to risk 2. So risk 2 came in here in asset performance risk as if we do not coordinate the needs of each asset class or project work, we may not be as efficient as possible. So what does that mean? So for example, we may be removing new pavement to place new culvert. So it's that coordination of our projects and making sure that we're putting the right assets in our projects at the right time. And we did get one comment that came in on this one, so I wanted to open that up. Basically, one of our counties said, well, if projects are scoped properly, risk could be minimized. Does anybody have any other comments that they'd like to make at this time for this particular risk? Go ahead and include it in the chat so that everybody can see. And please don't poll. We're going to be going back to a likelihood poll next. So please stop your polling. And if you have a comment on risk 2, that would be great. Okay, let's see. We have, I think, a few, we have actually quite a few comments that have come in on this one. One of the comments that came in, I wasn't sure if that was for the coordination of needs, but it basically says more complex projects can make it harder to secure funding and delay the project. There was a comment that came in about additional right-of-way and environmental studies. Adding multiple assets can save dollars down the road on future projects. And here's one that came in that says, agree, it does not save money on the long run, but needs active participation from all involved. And the other one, it looks like that's the last comment that came in on this one. Culvert work can delay the delivery of timely pavement needs. So thank you for that. I think that was really good feedback. Now we're going to go ahead and poll on the likelihood. We're going to clear out our responses and go back to a likelihood. So hold on a minute. And here we go. So at this time, would everyone please poll on the likelihood that this risk will occur by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F, depending on if you think it will occur soon, like within the next year, or all the way to more than 25 years are your choices. See our numbers here. Okay, we're still working on this one. See where we're at here. We're at 48. We need one more. Oh, we've got 50. We're a little bit higher. So, and that's great too. We want to make sure we're consistent again for each and every one of these risks. So we're at 51. See how we're doing, and if the poll is slowing down, which it looks like it is. And so let's go ahead and close the poll at this time. Can we make sure that this one has been recorded? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and clear responses on this particular one and move to the consequence. So for risk 2, we want you to go ahead at this time and poll by texting A, B, C, D, or E on consequence of this particular risk by cost or impact to the system. Okay? We need about 8 more people to poll, so if you haven't included your response, please do so. We're at 45 right now, 46. I'd like to get close to 51. There's a few that haven't responded. I'll give it another minute or not even a minute, a couple more seconds. Okay, it looks like we're good. We're going to go ahead and close the poll at this time. So I hope that we've recorded this, and then I'll go ahead and clear responses. And we're going to move to the next risk. So risk 3, and please don't poll at this time until I give you the go-ahead, and that'll just make it cleaner for everybody. So risk 3, if we don't include ITS elements into roadway planning, then we may experience increased congestion and reduced freight mobility. A couple of comments that came in was, and again, this is just a comment to think about as we look at this, is one of our MPOs asked the question, right? Does ITS elements support public transit? So something to think about there. One of our counties, they didn't think this was really a big risk for them. They would rather see better jobs, housing balance, so that commuting would be reduced. That was an interesting comment as well. So if anybody would like to add additional comments in chat, that would be great. As I'm trying to keep track of this, let's see where we go here. I think the first one was annual pavement project delayed due to public comments for lane modifications, hence higher cost or missed regular maintenance. I'm not sure if that relates to this particular risk or the prior one. Okay, let me, I think that one was our prior risk comment. This one came in, if we don't use the ITS infrastructure installed, then this is just added cost without benefits. So thank you for that additional comment. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to poll on the likelihood that this risk will occur. And we'll do that by, at this time, texting A, B, C, D, E, or F. And if you could do that, we'll go ahead and start. Let me make sure I'm activating this particular. Here we go. Okay. We've got one response at this time. Hopefully it's working here. Does everybody see the likelihood poll for this particular risk? And if you can provide a response at this time by texting those. Let's see. Activate. Oh, here we go. Okay. Great. Let's see here. We're at 44. And it looks like a few more people are responding. There was another comment that came in on this. I'm having to look at 2 monitors here, but this next chat says this could almost be separated into 2 risk statements, congestion and freight focused. Good comment there, Robert. So thank you for that as we continue the poll. Okay, let's see where we're at. We're at 47. I think we've given this one enough time. So we'll go ahead and close the poll for the likelihood that this risk will occur, and we'll go ahead and record the response. Okay, thanks. And we're going to go ahead and clear that. And then we're going to move to the consequence. Okay, let me go ahead and clear, activate. Did it already begin, I guess, on this one?
No, that was from when you were reading the comments in the chat. People were voting, so you can clear
Okay.
the responses.
So
Yeah,
let's
go ahead.
clear, okay, thanks, Mary Alice. So let's clear the response and start over on this one. I apologize. So we're starting this one over. Thank you. We've got one in. Keep going, and we'll see how this comes out. So again, you have the opportunity to text A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence for this particular risk to the system, or as far as cost, whether it's a no cost impact or it has high cost. Okay. I think we were at 44 on the likelihood. We'd like to get close to that for the consequence.
You were at 46 on the
Was I
likelihood.
at 46? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we need to move on. If we could go ahead, and if anybody did not have an opportunity to do, oh, here we do. We're continuing. Thank you very much. So we've got 42. Let's see if we can bump that up by a couple more, if possible. Okay. Oh, got it. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll at this time and make sure that we have recorded the response. I'm going to go ahead and clear to make sure that we, oh, we had another one. I'm not sure if we recorded that last one, but it was one response for very high cost UA. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to our next risk. So risk 4 is if SHOP is not inclusive of congestion relief benefits, then mobility projects may receive less SHOP funding. For this particular risk, I don't really have, I did have one comment that came in on this. Then the comment came from a county that said, you know, major mobility improvements need to be funded from STIP, not SHOP. So that's one of the comments that I received on this particular one. Anybody else have any other comments that they'd like to indicate before we poll?
Hey, Dawn, this is Mike.
Yes.
Just a comment on this one.
Sure.
You know, I think this is one that would be nice to see if we think this still rises to the level, and maybe, you know, maybe the voting will bear that out. But, you know, I think at the time that this was being written, we were in a very different place than we are right now in terms of mobility in the SHOP. Because I think the shift over to VMT reduction and, you know, standing up programs for bike and ped may have mitigated this risk quite a bit. So I don't know, just, I mean, let's just do the voting, but, you know, this could have been largely mitigated by other events.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So SHOP, State Highway Operations and Protection Program. It is our major maintenance and rehabilitation program, funding program in Caltrans. And I do have another comment that came in that SHOP mobility projects could include roundabouts, traffic signals, and ramp meters. And someone else came up with the comment of, this one seems a bit down in the weeds. Thanks, Brad. That kept it real. So we'll go ahead at this point and we're going to poll on the, not on the consequence, on the likelihood. So let me move this slide to the likelihood. I want to make sure that we're getting and recording these correctly. So at this time, please go ahead and send your text response A, B, C, D, E, or F on the likelihood that this risk will occur in specific time. Okay, and here we go.
There's a comment in the chat.
Another comment came in. Okay. Thank you, Mary Alice. And if you want to read those off and help, that would be wonderful. But this one I'll go ahead with this one, and then if you can chime in whenever, that's great too. This one says, would be beneficial to look at this question with a broader lens. Congestion relief does not necessarily mean capacity increasing. Okay, good comment. We've got a number of responses at this point, which is really good. There was a comment, if we don't think that this is likely, do we choose F? Yes, you can do that. And, you know, one of the things I didn't point out, but because we really did want everybody to do this with us, right? I mean, this is a coordinated effort here, both Caltrans and local agencies. But, you know, if you don't really know, you know, you're not really sure how to respond, we just want to make sure that you know that you don't have to respond if it's not a risk that you're familiar with. So we want to make sure if you're responding that you understand what the risk statement means and how it would impact you. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that as well. And it looks like we have a good response rate here. Let's see what we've got. We've got a total of 40 that have responded. We've been a little higher than that, but I know there's a number of these risks. I'll give it a couple seconds longer. Yes.
So there is a comment that says this does not apply to local agencies.
Okay. Then maybe we'll stick with the 40. I appreciate that. There could be some of you that don't respond to this one. So let's go ahead and close this poll. And Yue, I hope that you've had the opportunity to go ahead and record that for us.
I'm also taking screenshots, Dawn.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary Alice. It takes a village here, guys, to do this work virtually. So I really appreciate everyone's help. So we're going to go ahead and clear responses, and we're going to move to the consequence for this particular risk. And here we go. We're going to go ahead and poll on the consequence for this particular risk to the system. You can text A, B, C, D, or E at this time.
Hey, Don, I notice it's showing the counts in the bottom right-hand corner. I know you keep jumping to another screen there, but it's giving you the total results right there.
Yeah, it does for the consequence, and I think the likelihood wasn't set up to have that there. And I could probably go in, but I just, I'll try that for the next go around and see if I can get that to pop up. I think that's what happened. Okay, let's see where we're at. So we've got 31. We had more than that for the likelihood response. Let me give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll have to call it good.
I just confirmed with UA, and he's good. He's
good. Okay.
With his microphone, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, it doesn't look like it's moving. We're going to go ahead and record this response at this time, and I'm going to go ahead and clear responses, and we're going to move on to risk 5 because this is taking probably a little longer than we anticipated here. So we're going to move on to our next category of risks. It's the highway safety risk, and I can tell you that this particular risk was the top ranked priority risk in the initial TAMP. And I did receive additional comments that came in on this one that I'd like to talk about as well. So this particular risk statement says, if accident reporting is not modernized, we may not accelerate some factors of safety improvements. So I received some comments, and this one was interesting from one of our city governments that said, yes, including the sharing of joint intersection crash data, where some are reported to locals and counties, and then some others are reported to Caltrans. So it sounds like there's still some coordination issues there. I got a couple other MPO comments that came in that said, not only is modernization of accident reporting needed between CHP and Caltrans, it's also needed for MPOs and RTPAs. And also that we need to make sure we're considering it and we have the best available data because safety is a critical factor. So those are some of the comments that came in on this particular risk. Anybody else want to chime in before we poll on it?
Hey, Don, just a little history on this one.
Yeah.
I think at the time that this risk was established, there was, there was quite a backlog of getting accident information into SWITRs to get it available for use. And I don't remember exactly how many years, but I want to say I think it was more than 3-year backlog. And I think that was really the initial genesis of this risk. And I know that there was a Lean Six Sigma effort done, and I know there's been a lot of improvement in the coordination between CHP and Caltrans. But based on all the discussion today, it sounds like this risk could very well be between Caltrans and local agencies as well. I was thinking maybe we had mitigated this to a substantial degree, but the comments today make me think maybe we need to keep it in here. But let's let the voting bear it out.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Does anybody have any additional feedback before we poll? I'm not seeing any. So if that's the case, Marco, okay, Marco is saying CHP doesn't report all the accidents, especially those that don't require Caltrans maintenance involvement. Okay, that's a challenge for sure. Any others that we need to consider before we poll? CHP is working with various local agencies on electronic reporting interfaces. Thanks, Thomas, on that comment. And Bassam is indicating some local police departments had deployed online real-time accident reporting system. Implementing that on all local may potentially help address this risk. This may be why many locals do not have, or maybe some locals have not adopted this or something, I think is what he's indicating. Then Yolanda, hi Yolanda. Yolanda's from our first workshop. So she's indicating we have to check 3 to 4 sources to get the complete picture. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay. Great feedback to everybody. I really appreciate that. Let's go ahead and we're going to take a poll on this, and we're going to start with the likelihood. So let me move this over to the likelihood poll, and at this time go ahead and record your results by texting either A, B, C, D, E, or F. Just choose one at this time, and we'll see how this one goes. If I hate to mix anything up at this point. I'd rather just keep it the way it is. Let's go ahead and see how many responses we have at this time. We have 38. So please go ahead and if you haven't already, go ahead and respond. I don't see it moving, so we're going to go ahead and record this as our final response for the likelihood of this particular risk occurring at a specific time period. And UA, I think you have probably recorded it at this time. So we're going to go ahead and clear our responses and go to the consequence for this particular risk. So go ahead and at this time record your response by texting A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence of this risk to the system.
There's a question in chat. Has there been any consideration to tap into modern technologies such as Waze, Google Maps that crowdsource accident reporting?
That's a great comment, and I think that would be a perfect thing to talk about when we break out and we look at mitigation strategies. Like, how can we make this better? But short answer is, Caltrans does partner with Waze a bit, but I'm not sure we're doing it for the purposes of accident reporting.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and complete this poll at this time, and we'll go ahead and record it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Yue. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and clear the response. There he is. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and clear the responses and move to our next risk. Thanks, everybody. So risk 6. So this one is under our external threats category. If we don't plan for extreme weather events, then bridges, roadways, and structures will be damaged. It's a very general statement, in my opinion, but that was what we had in our initial TAMP. And we did get an interesting comment that came in about this, and it basically said, FEMA and other funding does not cover the cost of repairing and restoring local streets and roads, including those leading to and from the state highway system. Continued fire and flooding disasters will continually erode these systems unless additional emergency transportation recovery funding is provided annually. So I did a little bit of research because we are going to talk a little bit more about federal ER money and how we looked at that money from, the repeatedly damaged asset federal rule. And not only did we look at it for state highway system, but we looked at it for local roads. And I did receive some information on eligibility for local roads. And so the local agencies can apply for federal ER funding if their public roads are classified as arterial, urban collector, or major rural collector. So I did want to bring that up as well with regards to some of these comments. Let's see, I had another comment that came in. Choices are bad for something like safety. Consequences are different from losing access to the road and or duration. So I think that is a general comment. Oh, someone wants me to repeat about the federal funding. So federal emergency relief funds are available on local streets and roads if the roads are classified as arterial, urban collector, or major rural collector. So I think that was what the question was for federal ER money. Now, the comment that came in from one of our MPOs was in relation to FEMA. So that's also federal dollars, but that they probably have different eligibility criteria under some of those other funding programs. So with that, if there's no other questions, let's go ahead and, or comments, let's go ahead and we're going to poll at this time, and we're going to do the likelihood first. So let me bring that back up, and please record your results or your particular score at this time by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F on the likelihood that this risk will occur within a certain time period. Mike wanted everybody to remember that the TAMP only looks at the NHS routes, other principal arterials, or higher class routes. Good point, Mike. The other thing was we have a percentage of likelihood varies with the time frame based on science projections. And that came in from Brenda Pell-Jones at Caltrans. Okay, let's see, are we getting close to wrapping this one up? Let's look at our number here. We've got 41 responses. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out, and let's go ahead and record it.
Yes.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and clear it this time, and we're going to move to the consequence. So please go ahead and text your response A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence of this particular risk occurring. As far as the, the cost impact or the loss of service, meaning that, there could be a loss of a specific lane, a route, or even a more critical route, which would put us into the very high cost or loss of critical route category, which is E. So those are your options. We'll go ahead. We're at 30 results. I'd like to get that a little higher before we conclude. Looks like we've slowed down. Here's your last chance to record your response. Okay, great. I think we're going to go ahead and call it. So let's close the poll and take a snapshot and record this particular poll for the consequence of risk 6.
Yes.
Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and clear response. Thanks, everybody. And we're going to move to risk 7. Risk 7 starts the financial risk category. And this is throwing a little, a change to our process here because you're seeing this risk crossed out. Why is it crossed out? This ended up in the initial TAMP, but it was very specific to SB1. And at the time of the initial TAMP, SB1 had just passed. And so these were the dollars that were coming into the system. And there was a lot of concern about the fact that if we don't spend the money fast enough, we could lose it and it would go back to general funds, the general fund or for other needs. There was we felt that we really didn't need to poll on this one just because we know that things have changed 4 years later. SB1 is no longer a new funding source. So does anybody have any comment on that? There were some other comments comments that came in chat for the prior risk. And thanks, everybody. So I hope as we move forward, you're continuing to look at your chat while we do this as well. If there's no comments on this one, we're going to move to risk 8. Risk 8 is another interesting one. You may not be familiar with the redistribution of federal dollars, or it may not be something that that in your agency you know about or have information about. So, but we did want to go ahead and poll on it because we weren't sure. And risk 8 is the risk statement of if projects do not federalize and use state-only funds, then we may lose federal dollars and may lose our redistribution. So redistribution is a process where FHWA, based on apportionments, this gets into more complicated financial analysis and so forth, but each state has the opportunity to compete for additional federal money at a specific time every year. I believe it happens like in August time period. And then if we're successful in California by indicating that we need the money, that we've used our apportionments, we will get additional dollars. And so this one was specific to that particular financial risk. And do we have any other comments? Let me see if I had anything that came in. I did not have any pre-comments on this particular risk. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about or bring up with this one? May know some history or backstory on this one as well, because I'm not really sure about that. Okay, I don't see anything, so we're going to move into the poll.
Wait, Dawn, before you,
Yeah.
I know you're on a roll here, but this one was generated right after the passage of SB1, and there was, this sort of looming opportunity with new money coming in, and there was this perception that we needed to get that money spent quickly, and then so there was a concern that if we just went out with SB1 money in our projects, then we would potentially lose federal funds. So that's really was the genesis of this this overall risk.
Thanks, Mike. So let's go ahead and poll on this one. We're going to start with the likelihood. So at this time, if you could please text your response A, B, C, D, E, or F. Comment came in, do we want to scratch this risk? That may be the case depending on how the poll comes out. But we'll go ahead and poll. Okay, so in this case, we have 32 responses. Let's go ahead and record those at this time and close this poll. Okay, and we're going to move to the consequence.
Yes.
I was a little quick there, Yue. Sorry about that. So for the consequence, go ahead and text your response A, B, C, D, or E at this time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this poll. Can you go ahead and record this one?
Yes.
Thanks, Yue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Mean the result mean hidden from this clear response. Can you go back?
Show response. Let me look here. Like that. Can you not see it?
Yeah, because it's hidden. Oh, okay. Now I.
Oops. Oh, I see. Sorry about that. Okay.
Just give me a couple seconds. Okay. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go ahead and clear response. And let's go ahead and move to risk 9.
There was a comment in the chat, Dawn. This seems like an issue that only CTC and MPOs can manage. And then Robert, this is one where cost would be higher than the threat of loss of route.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. So how, depending on how you're looking at it when you're doing, you know, your thought process on that particular risk. So, you know, again, this is your judgment on this. So however you would think about that particular risk, go ahead and hopefully you did the poll based on what you felt was more important. So let's go ahead with risk 9 and talk about that one a little bit. So risk 9 was if money is spent on the 4 core assets that are the most need, then there may not be enough money later down the road for you know, other assets or to maintain what we already have. So at this point, I did get a few comments that came in. And it basically, one of the items that came in is, yeah, and they were concerned about safety projects that they could be delayed, including deferred maintenance. There was another interesting comment that said, you know, grant funds are restrictive as well, and so funding ops and maintenance are a challenge. And the other one was, they were just curious whether ITS includes future innovations like electric or autonomous vehicles. So this is a case where, you know, we may want to think about that in terms of reframing that particular risk or clarifying it or something like that. Any other comments on this one? Here's one that came in. Wouldn't the loss of route be inevitable if the funding dries up? Oh, that was based on the comment about the how to consider the consequence. Okay, if we don't have any other comments that have come in on financial risk, I want to go ahead and poll. This is taking a lot more time than we thought, but we wanted to make sure we had enough conversation going and that we were getting good results. So at this time, let's go ahead and poll on the likelihood for this financial risk. And you can do that by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F. Okay, we're slowing down. So if you haven't had a chance to respond, please do so at this time. We would like to at least get through the 15 risks today if possible, and we'll have to postpone and add the additional risks as part of our next workshop.
Hey,
So if
Dawn,
we-
sorry
yes.
to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just keep plowing through the risks.
Okay.
And let's just take it all the way up to 3:00 and then we'll close it down and we'll regroup with whatever we have to pick up after that. Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Mike. So let's go ahead and record this one. Let me look and see how many numbers. We're about 37 respondents. So Yue, if you could go ahead and record the responses, that would be great.
Can I go back?
There we go. Sorry.
Just give me a second. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, we'll go ahead and clear the responses at this time and move to the consequence. So here we go. Here is the consequence poll for this particular risk. And at this time, go ahead and send in your response, A, B, C, D, or E. It looks like we're slowing down. If you haven't had a chance to record, please do so at this time so that we can close this poll. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll at this time. Let's go ahead and record it.
Got it.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We're going to move to the next risk. Risk 10. If available funding does not cover our needs, then we will still have to defer some maintenance and operations. What did I get on this one? Let's see here. I did get a comment from an MPO that said decades of a stagnant gas tax rate has created a backlog of deferred maintenance projects. So good comment. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to add for this particular risk before we poll? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take, let me clear this one because we need to move to the likelihood first. We're going to do that here. And so go ahead and poll on this particular risk on the likelihood that this risk will occur within a specific time period and text A, B, C, D, E, or F at this time. Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to respond, please do so that we can close out this particular poll. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll at this time. Let me see the results. There's 36 results. Let's go ahead and record them.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to clear the response and move to the consequence. At this time, go ahead and record your responses. Let me clear this one out. I'm sorry about that. We want to make sure that we record these correctly. So go ahead and respond at this time, A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence for this particular risk to the system. There were a couple comments. One is, I can see this being a recurring issue with the shift to electric vehicles, eventual loss of gas tax revenue over time. This is particularly concerning when you consider the number of new assets we are adding to the system. And another one came in, is it possible to find what are low, medium, high, and very high costs in terms of millions of dollars? These are very subjective. That is true. They are subjective, it's also subjective in terms of the magnitude of dollars as well, depending on size of agency, their revenue stream, and so forth. So we left this the way that it is here, so you can set that for hopefully your agency. Okay, so what do we got? We got 36 results. We're going to go ahead and close this poll at this time. And did
Yes.
we replace it? Okay, great. So we're going to clear that one out, and we are going to move to the next risk, which I think is information and decision risks. We have a few in this category, and these are important ones too to talk about. This one has to do with our own workforce. If we don't conduct succession planning and knowledge transfer, then Caltrans will lose efficiency and have greater exposure to error. Now, again, this is Caltrans. we may want to change that up when we revise this, but in some cases, I think there was some feedback that, maybe this isn't a TAMP risk, but we did receive comments that came in that said, lack of mentoring will ultimately impact the state transportation system. So we did get some feedback that made that statement clear as well. Yeah, and Celia's saying, is this the enterprise risk that Mike mentioned earlier? Yeah, so it's more of an organizational risk. And it's not limited to Caltrans. I agree with that as well. So thank you for that. Let's see, we got one more coming. Is this an enterprise risk rather than a TAMP risk? Lots of things eventually domino onto the TAMP, but this seems a stretch. So again, we also had some, we felt that similarly that it wasn't a TAMP risk, but we had some locals that thought it was. So we needed to go ahead and poll on it. So at this time, let's go ahead and poll. I don't want to not poll on this one. And we're going to go ahead and clear these since we're going to be doing the likelihood first. And we'll move to the likelihood. So at this time, can you please poll on the likelihood that this risk will occur? And if you don't think it's a high risk for the TAMP, then you can definitely record that in your responses by choosing more than 25 years and also no impact when we get to consequence. Like we're slowing down here. What's our responses? 31. So at this time, if you haven't had a chance to record your response on the likelihood that this risk will occur, please do so. And we will close out the poll. Okay, I don't see any movement. So we're going to close the poll at this time. Can we go ahead and record it?
Yes.
Here comes another one. You got it? Okay. Oop, here comes another one. Go ahead and take another snapshot. Sorry about that. We do need to close and move on. So I think this will be it, Yue. Okay, thanks. We're going to go ahead and clear the response. And we're going to move to the consequence. So please record your response on the consequence of this risk to the system at this time. Here's a good comment that came in on this one. If the cost for untrained employees means higher support costs, doesn't that mean less money to spend on assets? That came in from one of our district asset managers. Good comment. Another comment from a district asset manager at Caltrans is, this is a problem for small agencies that cannot afford to keep employees once Caltrans starts hiring. That was a good point there. Yeah, so all of those things are true, and you can weigh in on that with your response. And we're going to go ahead. We're at 27. We're a little bit lower. If you haven't recorded your response, I'll give you a second to do so. Okay, going once, going twice. We're going to go ahead and close the poll, and we'll go ahead and record it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and move into our next risk on information and decision risks. So risk 12 states, if we do not have reliable asset performance models, including reliable decay rates and reasonable goals, then investment decisions will not be optimal. So for risk 12, there were actually a couple of comments that came in. So if from one of our county agencies, it says well thought out scope, including input from maintenance, would minimize this risk. The other comment that came in, which I thought was really good from an MPO, was we really do need to focus on reliable asset performance models on the non-SHS NHS, meaning the local NHS, because without those, investment decisions may not be optimal. So good point on that. And any other comments before we pull for risk 12? Especially an issue for NHS off the SHS. So definitely, that seems to be a recurring comment there. I'm going to go ahead and we can take a poll at this time for this particular risk. let me clear the consequence. We're going to do a likelihood. Okay, so the likelihood on this particular risk occurring in a specific time period, go ahead and text your response A, B, C, D, E, or F at this time. Okay, so if you have not had a chance to record your response, please do so at this time. I'll give you another second or so to do that. Let's see how many responses we got. We're at 33. So I'm going to say let's go ahead and close the poll and take a snapshot and record this response.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to clear it and we're going to move to consequence. So at this time, let me clear this here. This didn't clear out. Okay, so at this time, please record your consequence and text A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence to the system for this particular risk.
We are right at about 3 o'clock, Dawn. Just wanted to give you
Yeah.
the heads up. I know we've got one more risk.
Yeah, we actually have we have 3 more risks. I don't think we're going to get through them today. We don't want to keep everybody. We do have another workshop planned, and we're just going to move into that next workshop to finish this process. We thought it would go a lot quicker, but it's just the way it is. This particular process virtually is definitely a different animal. So at this point, let's go ahead and record the consequence for this particular risk, and we will finish up in our next workshop. But before we do, I want to do one last thing for everybody. I want you to think about what we've talked about today and the risks that we've identified and assessed, and we want to do this. We want you to text one word to describe what risk management means to you, and this will finish off our workshop today. So please take just 30 seconds or so, think about it, and then it will be interesting. It'll be kind of an interesting thing to end up this particular workshop with, and then we'll close out. So I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon and bearing with us on the technology end of it. All of the comments and feedback that came in were awesome. Everything has just been really smooth overall. I appreciate everybody's help. Uezo from the Office of Asset Management for helping me record. Mary Alice Morency for just doing all the logistics behind the scenes. I think Mike had to step away. He has another presentation this afternoon. So of course he's our leader in asset management and has done so much to put this all together for everyone. So with that, I really appreciate everybody's time. This is an interesting word cloud that's come up. When we look at these large words that pop out in the middle, strategic, opportunity, balance, uncertainty, all of those, I mean, what can I say? It's so true when it comes to risk management in the camp. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Mary Alice, thank you everybody for attending, and you've received an invitation.
Are you going to have 1 hour?
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, we will stay online for you if you would like to discuss anything with regards to risk management in an informal Q&A. We will do that. We'll stay online for you. And the rest of you have a great rest of your evening, and we will catch up with you in about a week to finish this process off.